I stood in front of my aunt's mansion, gripping the expensive bottle of wine I'd brought to her annual summer party. The same party where, for the past 5 years, I'd been treated like an unwelcome guest in my own family. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. "Oh, Sophia's here," Aunt Margaret's voice carried through the door, dripping with fake enthusiasm. "Everyone, the help has arrived." Laughter erupted from inside. I forced myself to stay calm, remembering the empire I'd built while they were busy mocking me. At 32, I was worth more than their entire family combined, but they didn't know that. To them, I was just Sophia, the family failure who worked with computers, or whatever they thought I did. The door swung open. Aunt Margaret stood there in her designer dress, wine glass already in hand. Her eyes swept over my simple white sundress, lips curling in disapproval. "Well, at least you showed up on time this year," she said, stepping aside. "The kitchen needs help with the appetizers." I bit back a response. 5 years ago, when I'd first started attending these parties after moving back from Silicon Valley, they'd assumed I was a caterer because I was helping in the kitchen. Instead of correcting them, I'd let them believe it. Sometimes the best way to learn people's true nature is to let them think you're beneath them. Inside, the grand living room buzzed with the usual crowd. My cousin Victoria, proud owner of a chain of boutique clothing stores, funded entirely by Aunt Margaret, held court near the fireplace. Her husband Brad, who managed a small hedge fund, was busy bragging about his latest million-dollar deal. "Sophia," Victoria called out, her voice carrying that same condescending tone our aunt had perfected. "The kitchen's that way. Try not to break anything expensive this time." More laughter. I smiled tightly, remembering the incident she was referring to. Last year, I'd accidentally knocked over one of Aunt Margaret's priceless vases. Of course, I'd replaced it immediately with an authentic Ming Dynasty piece worth 20 times more, but they assumed I'd bought a cheap replica from Chinatown. In the kitchen, the actual catering staff looked confused when I walked in. They knew who I really was. Their company was one of my many investments. "Miss Chen," the head chef whispered, "you don't have to." I shook my head slightly and he understood. Sometimes it's better to let people show their true colors. "Sophia," my cousin Andrew's voice boomed from the dining room. "Since you're in there, bring us some more champagne. The good stuff this time, not the cheap bottles." I grabbed a bottle of Dom Perignon, coincidentally from a vineyard I'd acquired last spring, and headed to the dining room. The family table was full of my so-called successful relatives. Besides Victoria and Brad, there was my cousin Emma, a junior partner at a law firm, constantly reminding everyone of her Harvard degree. Next to her sat her fiancé James, a real estate agent who claimed to be a property mogul. "Just set it down there," Aunt Margaret waved dismissively. "And please use the kitchen entrance next time. The help doesn't need to parade through the main house." I placed the bottle on the table, noting how my aunt's expensive watch was actually a knockoff. I could tell because my company had recently bought the authentic brand. "Actually," I said quietly, "I was hoping to join." "Oh honey," Victoria cut in, her voice syrupy sweet. "There's no room at this table for, well, you know. The kitchen staff usually eats in the back. I'm sure they'd love your company. Besides," Emma added, adjusting her fake Cartier bracelet, "we're discussing investment opportunities." "Nothing you'd understand." James nodded smugly. "I just closed a deal on a luxury apartment complex downtown. 20 million in financing." He puffed up proudly. "That's the kind of business we handle at this table." I almost laughed. The luxury complex he was talking about was actually owned by one of my shell companies. We'd let him broker the deal because his commission would barely dent our profits. "Of course," I said softly. "I'll just go back to the kitchen then." "That's right," Aunt Margaret smiled condescendingly. "Know your place, dear. Not everyone is meant for success." As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Harrison Blake, my wealth manager. I usually ignored calls during family events, but this one was important. "Excuse me," I said, stepping aside. "I need to take this." "Really?" Victoria rolled her eyes. "Taking personal calls during work? How unprofessional." I answered the phone, putting it on speaker deliberately. Harrison's crisp, professional voice filled the room. "Ms. Chen, your portfolio restructuring is complete. The new value after this morning's tech acquisition is just over $200 million. Would you like me to proceed with the European market expansion as discussed? The sound of shattering glass made me turn. Brad had dropped his champagne flute, his face pale as a sheet. The entire table had frozen, forks suspended midair, mouths hanging open. Yes, Harrison, I replied calmly. And how's the new acquisition looking? The luxury apartment complex downtown? Already generating 15% above projected revenue. Would you like me to send the full report to your private jet? I know you're flying to Singapore tonight for the board meeting. Aunt Margaret's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. Emma was gripping her fiancé's arm so hard he winced. Victoria looked like she'd seen a ghost. I ended the call and turned back to the table, allowing myself a small smile. Now, about that investment discussion, shall we talk about real business? The silence that followed felt eternal. I could almost hear their mental calculators whirring, desperately trying to process that the help they'd banished to the kitchen was worth more than their combined net worth multiplied by 10. Aunt Margaret recovered first, her social conditioning kicking in. Sophia, darling. She stood up, arms outstretched. Why didn't you tell us? We've been so worried about your career choices. I sidestepped her attempted embrace. Have you? I recall last Christmas you told everyone I was playing with computers while Victoria was building a real business. Victoria's face flushed. Her boutique chain had just filed for bankruptcy protection, not that she'd told anyone yet. I knew because my investment firm had declined her desperate plea for funding last week. But surely you understand, Emma jumped in, her lawyer instinct sensing danger. We only wanted what's best for you. All those times we tried to help. Help. I couldn't hold back a laugh. Like when you offered me a job as your legal secretary. Or when James here promised to teach me about real estate by having me file his paperwork. James shifted uncomfortably, probably remembering how he'd mansplained property values to me last month. If he'd bothered to check, he'd have known I owned half the commercial real estate in downtown. Now, Sophia, Brad attempted his hedge fund manager voice, let's discuss this rationally. Perhaps we could explore some investment opportunities. Like your fund's recent attempt to acquire Microtech Solutions? I interrupted smoothly. Interesting pitch. Unfortunately, my company outbid you yesterday. The paperwork should be finalized tomorrow. Brad's face went pale. That acquisition would have saved his struggling fund. He'd been bragging about it all evening. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my executive assistant. Miss Chin, your helicopter is ready on the rooftop. The board in Singapore moved the meeting up an hour. Thank you, Claire. I'll be there shortly. I turned back to my stunned relatives. I should go. Unlike some people's business ventures, mine actually requires attention. Wait. Victoria grabbed my arm. You can't just drop this on us and leave. We're family. I gently removed her hand. Family? Let's talk about family. I pulled out my tablet, opening a folder I'd kept for years. 2018. Aunt Margaret tells everyone I'm embarrassing the family name by leaving my tech job to start my own company. 2019. Emma spreads rumors that I'm mentally unstable for refusing a position at her law firm. 2020. Victoria here suggests I know my place and stick to serving drinks at family functions. We didn't mean, Aunt Margaret started. 2021, I continued, my voice cold. You all laughed when my first company failed. Called me delusional. Said I should stop pretending to be a businesswoman. Not one of you knew that failure taught me exactly what I needed to build my empire. But that's in the past, Emma pleaded. We're different now. Are you? 10 minutes ago, before that phone call, where did you want me to eat? The kitchen staff, who had been pretending not to listen, suddenly found their shoes very interesting. The only thing different now is that you know I'm rich. And that's exactly why I kept it hidden. I wanted to see who you really were. Brad cleared his throat. About Microtech, perhaps we could discuss. Your fund's bid was inadequate, your business plan was flawed, and your projections were fantasies. I cut him off. I know because I personally reviewed and rejected it. 3 times. Victoria's eyes widened. Wait, you're not just rich, you're the CEO of Phoenix Ventures? The investment firm that keeps rejecting your loan applications? Yes. I smiled as recognition finally dawned on their faces. Though I prefer my other title, owner of the building we're standing in. What? Aunt Margaret whispered. I bought this house last month when the bank called in your mortgage. They offered it to me first, given that I own the bank. I checked my watch. You should receive the official notice tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm not evicting you. Yet. The new rent is quite reasonable. The room erupted in chaos. Victoria burst into tears, probably realizing who actually controlled her company's fate. Brad looked ready to faint, no doubt connecting the dots about various failed business deals. Emma was frantically Googling Phoenix Ventures on her phone, her face growing paler by the second. You can't do this, Aunt Margaret said weakly. We're blood. Blood. I picked up my purse, a custom piece worth more than her car. Blood didn't stop you from treating me like a servant. Blood didn't stop you from mocking my dreams. Blood didn't stop you from making me eat in the kitchen. I walked to the kitchen door where the staff straightened respectfully. Speaking of which, everyone here gets a bonus. 2 months' salary. For having to put up with this family's condescension. The head chef broke into a huge smile. Thank you, Ms. Chin. And order whatever food you want for yourselves. Premium wine, wagyu beef, caviar. It's on me. You shouldn't have to eat in the kitchen either. Turning back to my shell-shocked relatives, I delivered one final blow. By the way, that cheap bottle of champagne you've been complaining about? It's from my vineyard in France. Worth about $2,000 a bottle. I'd say don't waste it, but... I gestured at the puddle from Brad's dropped glass. Too late. My phone buzzed yet again. Miss Chin, Singapore is waiting. Coming. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Victoria. About your emergency loan application. Denied. Maybe ask Aunt Margaret for help. Though given her new rent payments, she might be a bit strapped for cash. The walk to my waiting helicopter felt like floating. Behind me, I could hear the meltdown continuing. Accusations, crying, probably some bargaining. But none of it mattered anymore. As the helicopter lifted off, I saw them spilling out onto the front lawn, watching helplessly as their newly discovered wealthy relative disappeared into the night. My pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Heading to Singapore, Miss Chin? Actually, let's stop by my vineyard in France first. I think I need a drink. I pulled out my tablet, opening my email. The subject line read, Urgent. Family Property Holdings Update. With a satisfied smile, I began typing. To all family members subject. New property management notice. Dear family. Following recent acquisitions, I thought you should know about some changes to your living arrangements. Don't worry about contacting your landlord with questions. You're speaking to her now. Best regards, Sophia Chincio, Phoenix Ventures. The next morning, my assistant handed me a stack of messages. Your cousin Victoria has called 17 times. She's offering to sell her remaining company shares. Decline. Emma wants to know if you need in-house legal counsel. Pass. And your Aunt Margaret. Claire hesitated, fighting a smile. She wants to know if you'd like to sit at the head of the table for next month's family dinner. I looked up from my computer where I was finalizing the Microtech acquisition. Tell her I'll have to decline. I have a prior commitment. Another business meeting? No. I smiled, remembering all those lonely meals in the kitchen. I'm having dinner with the real MVPs, the catering staff. They're the only ones who knew my worth before my net worth. The family that had banished me to the kitchen was now desperately trying to get a seat at my table. But I'd learned long ago, success doesn't change who you are, it reveals who others are. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Aunt Margaret. Darling, about the rent increase. I turned off my phone and focused on my work. After all, empires aren't built by dwelling on the past. They're built by proving it wrong. And I had a lot more proving to do.